On behalf of the Coalition and the Secretariat, I'm truly delighted to welcome you at our fifth webinar out of the scientific webinar series organized by the Coalition. This one is to giving you a status of seaweed farming in Africa, and identifying opportunities on which species to grow on this territory, introduced by Dr. Msuya and Professor John Bolton. So first, a few words about the Global Seaweed Coalition. You may already know, we are a global partnership established to support the safe and sustainable development of the seaweed industry at this scale. We do that through our 4 action pillars: funding, advocacy, science and technology, and policy. We provide seed fundings for projects through call for proposal, spread the seaweed narrative in global, national, and local forums, share knowledge about scientific and technological development, and good practices in the industry, and drive and influence policy change from local to global levels. The coalition was launched in March 2021 as a Safe Seaweed Coalition with funding of £3 million for an initial 3 years from Lloyd Register Foundations and support from the French National Research Center, and together with United Nations Global Compact organizations, which now house the coalitions. So far, we have delivered about €1.1 million through 2 competitive calls for proposals for projects established in 26 different countries. And our 3rd call is being finalized to select new laureates by the end of April. We focus on our science and technology pillar. In fact, within the scientific council of the coalitions, we gather a group of 15 scientific specialists based in top research institutions to advise and assess projects received out of the call for proposals. We also organize workshops and webinars, such as this one today, on a regular basis. The last ones were focused on methane reduction from livestock, CO2 capture from seaweeds, pest and diseases on specific seaweed species, IMTA, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. You can find them all online on our YouTube channel. Also, our last workshop on seaweed biobanking was held at the end of February and lead to new working groups on the specific topic with a deliverable target for the next International Seaweed Symposium in 2025 in British Columbia. GSC members represent the entire seaweed value chains, from smallholder farmers to multinational businesses, specialized research institutes, or intergovernmental organizations, working together to realize the full potential of the seaweed sector and to ensure its safety for consumers, workers, and the environment. So before we start with the webinar, a couple of housekeeping details before we get into the substance of the event. Through the discussion, please feel free to post questions or comments in the chat. My colleague Sophia and myself will be monitoring the chat. Even though we are all familiar with Zoom calls, again, to remember to please stay muted unless called upon. So now, turning to our event. The objective of the event is to provide an overview on scientific information about the status of seaweed farming in Africa. Africa is a major global producer of the red carrageenan-producing tropical eucheumatoid seaweeds, Eucheuma and Kappaphycus. This industry, which was born in Tanzania, produced, and in this country, produced 92% of the African production, about 120,000 tons of seaweeds grown in aquaculture, but increasing amounts are also grown in Madagascar, Kenya, and Mozambique. Other seaweed species are also grown, such as Gracilaria species in Tunisia, or such as a giant kelp in Namibia, with a blue kelp project to be valorized as biostimulants and other products, valuable products from brown seaweeds. South Africa is one of the major global producers of the green seaweed Ulva, grown in innovative integrated systems with abalones. All these seaweeds have a high potential for increased production in Africa, both, of course, for the export market, that is mainly the case currently, but also for providing food and other valuable products for Africa. Now, for a seaweed revolution in Africa, to supply or to its over 1.2 billion people, Africa needs to produce very much more. What seaweed should Africa grow? Africa is endowed with over 2,000 seaweed species growing naturally in the tropical and temperate waters of its 38 coastal countries. The potential for expansion of aquaculture of the current species groups will be discussed during this webinar. Our keynote speakers, Dr. Msuya, based in Tanzania at Dar es Salaam University, and Professor John Bolton, based in South Africa at the University of Cape Town, we are publishing together a note on the status of seaweed farming in Africa in 2022. They will share their knowledge with us today. Let me take you through the agenda. First, Dr. Msuya will speak for about 30 minutes, followed by Professor John Bolton for about the same time. And then we will open the floor for about 15 minutes of discussions, Q&A for them to take questions from the chat and from the floor. We will close at about 5 minutes to the hour. And now I open the floor to our speakers. So first, Flower, if you can share your screen or to start your talk. It's yours. The floor is yours.
All right, so greetings to everyone. So I'm going to speak about African seaweed as Philippe has introduced, and to see what is happening there and what we think is good to do so as to revolutionize the African seaweed industry. In Africa, we have a lot of seaweed species that are growing naturally in the water. We have more than 2,000 species of, the red seaweeds, brown seaweeds, green seaweeds. So more than 2,000 species that are growing naturally in our waters. Of these 2,000 species, we are cultivating very few for now. We're cultivating about 4 species only. So we are farming the red carrageenan-producing seaweeds, Eucheuma and Kappaphycus. Those are the main seaweeds that are farmed in Africa. And also we are farming Gracilaria, the red Gracilaria that produces the gel agar, in contrast to the carrageenan-producing from Eucheuma and Kappaphycus. And also the green seaweed Ulva is farmed in Africa. There are large volumes of Eucheuma and Kappaphycus. Gracilaria and Ulva are in smaller volumes. Now, one thing you need to note here in this Eucheuma and Kappaphycus is that Kappaphycus is a higher valued seaweed. The gel extracted from Kappaphycus is a thicker gel. It's more useful in the industry. So its price is actually twice that of spinosum. So throughout, when I say higher value seaweed, cottony, then you will understand what I mean. And we will talk about cottony and spinosum in a few minutes. The Eucheuma and Kappaphycus, the varieties that we are farming in Africa were imported from the Philippines. And it's not surprising because there are many countries that have imported these varieties from the Philippines, and because Eucheuma and Kappaphycus also grow naturally in our waters, so it was easier to import varieties of the same species. And when we look at the continent of Africa, seaweed farming started in Tanzania actually in 1989. And then it expanded to other countries. I'm talking about now farming of Eucheuma and Kappaphycus in 1989, and then it expanded to other countries. So we have Madagascar, Kenya, Mozambique. These are farming the Eucheuma and the Kappaphycus mostly. And we have South Africa that is farming the green seaweed Ulva, shown here on the right-hand side, and the Gracilaria, which is a red seaweed that produces the gel agar, is farmed in Mauritius and Rodrigues, and also in Tunisia. Now, these are where the seaweed is farmed. Now we have a number of other countries where the seaweed is actually harvested from the wild. Then it is not like going to the sea and harvest the seaweed and sustainably. No, most of these countries use seaweed that is cast at the beach because we have a lot of blooming of seaweeds all along our coastal areas in Africa. So some countries use this seaweed, you say, cast at the beach to produce some products and so on. And there are others that if there's a harvesting, it will be sustainable harvesting, but mostly they use the cast seaweed at the beach. Africa is, you also heard from our abstract, is the third largest producer of these red seaweeds. The red seaweeds we are talking about, the Eucheuma and the Kappaphycus, were the third largest producer after Indonesia and Philippines. And the current production, we're talking about around this year, 2023, beginning of this year, production is about 200,000 tons of fresh seaweed. And here I'm showing African countries that produce seaweed. So if you look at this, you see that there are those from North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, and so on, Southern Africa. And of course, Tanzania is the main producer here, followed by Madagascar and so on, but we'll talk about it in a while. So let us look at one country after another. So when we start with Tanzania, we said it is the main producer of seaweed in Africa. And in Tanzania, seaweed farming started in 1989. We have about 30,000 farmers that are producing seaweed in the country, and most of them are women, you know, constituting more than 80%. The species farmed now, I was talking about Kappaphycus and Eucheuma. So Eucheuma denticulatum, which is commercially known as Spinosa, and the Kappaphycus alvarezi and Kappaphycus striatus, they are both called cotonin. So so in Tanzania is farming 3 species, one of Eucheuma denticulatum and 2 of the Kappaphycus, which is Kappaphycus alvarezi and the Kappaphycus striatus. By the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, production in Tanzania is around 150 tons of fresh seaweed per year. And Tanzania is exporting seaweed mainly to France, Denmark, and USA. There are other smaller markets, but these are the majority, the main importers of the seaweed from Tanzania. In Madagascar now, Madagascar started farming seaweed 1 year after Tanzania, that is 1990. And the species farmed in Madagascar are the same as those farmed in Tanzania: Kappaphycus alvarezi, Kappaphycus striatus, and Eucheuma denticulatum. And actually these were imported from Tanzania because Tanzania started farming. So Madagascar, it was easy for Madagascar to get these seaweeds and start farming in their country. By 2020, Madagascar was producing 17,000 tons of Kappaphycus and 3,000 tons of Eucheuma denticulatum. And every time I say tons, it will be fresh weight. So it's fresh weight. By 2023, production of Kappaphycus has gone up a lot. Now they are reporting 3,000 tons of Kappaphycus and 3,000 tons of Eucheuma denticulatum. And Madagascar exports its seaweed to America, Europe, and Asia. So I want to mention here that in Madagascar, there are challenges of storms, cyclones that really affect production of seaweed. But despite this, the production has increased. And in each slide, I'm providing publications and reports that you can follow up and read or ask more about the sorry, about what I have presented. Now let us turn to Kenya. Kenya started commercial farming in around 2010, and there they are farming two species. This is the Eucheuma denticulatum and the Kappaphycus alvarezii. Again, what is farmed in Kenya was imported from Tanzania, and remember, it is the same seaweed that was the same varieties that were imported from the Philippines way back in 1989. In 2021, Kenya reports a production of 1,070 tons of these two red seaweeds. In 2023, the production has gone down a lot, and it is reporting only 377 tons of seaweed. So here it's because of the El Nino. This El Nino, it was raining too much, and these areas are prone to rain, water, and so on. So many of the farms were destroyed. But again, what we see here is that most of the farmers are women, 90%. And Kenya exports seaweed to France, Spain, and USA. Okay, so that is about Kenya. In Mozambique now, Mozambique started commercial farming in the year 2000, and by 2003, production was 5,230 tons of the two red seaweeds, Kappaphycus and Eucheuma. Okay, but on the way, there were a lot of challenges. Main challenge was market, because the buyers were from Tanzania, and somehow Mozambique couldn't produce enough biomass to pay for employing someone in Mozambique to buy seaweed for the companies that were in Tanzania. So the industry actually collapsed. Now we are seeing new effort in 2022. In 2022, they have started farming in northern Mozambique. There is a group called SJ Chamo Consultants. They are supported by Total Energies Mozambique. So they are reviving the farming. And now they have 106 beneficiaries. And again, majority of them are women, 74%. And the production that they are reporting currently is 120 tons. And they are produced in two areas in Funzi and Mondlane. So the aim of SJ Chama is to have from 106 beneficiaries to 150 beneficiaries, and increase the production up to 1,000 tons. Of course, there's research also going on in Environment Planning University to help with producing more seaweed in Mozambique. In Mauritius, they are farming a different species, that is the Gracilaria we talked about. They have a Gracilaria saliconia, that is a native seaweed that is growing in there. You know, in Mauritius, they don't have Eucheuma and Kappaphycus growing in their waters. So it is not possible or easy for them to bring in Eucheuma and Kappaphycus. So they are farming Gracilaria saliconia, and they started in 2011 with the first experiments, and then they went on to increase. Like in 2013, they were already farming in 5 sites, and they established large-scale farms in 2014. And they are reporting that in 2014, there was a production of 145.2 kilograms of fresh seaweed. And there isn't any, I couldn't get updated information, but I should say here that they have a big challenge of typhoons, cyclones. So it is very difficult for them to cultivate seaweed, not only in shallow waters, but also in deep waters. And in shallow waters, there's a lot of siltation and so on. So this is the last statistics that we have. In Southern Africa, here they have a different way of farming seaweed. It's not the open ocean like in these Eastern African countries I have talked about. Their farming is land-based, and they reported in 2020 that they had 1,644 tons of the green seaweed ulva that was produced in South Africa, and they are also producing Gracilaria gracilis, which is in South Africa and in Namibia, but you will hear about it more later. So these countries that are producing these two genera seaweeds for production of carrageenan, they have also been starting to add value slowly, to produce value-added products rather than selling raw materials every time. So in the continent of Africa, seaweed value addition started in 2006. We're talking about Eucheuma and Kappaphycus under the Zanzibar Seaweed Cluster Initiative. And from there, then Mauritius was also adding value starting in 2015. They started in 2015. And in Mauritius, they have a tradition of using seaweed, their Gracilaria, in pickles and so on. So they started before 2015 to add value to their seaweed. Now, Kenya started adding value in 2015. This was FAO working with the institutions and the government of Kenya. So they started to make seaweed products in 2015. And Mozambique is started to add value in 2022. Okay. Now, what we can report here is in the continent of Africa, we have around 50 different groups that are producing seaweed products, and these groups comprise more than 700 small-scale processors. And when we talk of groups, it varies. There are groups of 5, there are groups going all the way to 30 something. So it's a big number of people. That's why we have around 700 processors, and these are producing cosmetic and food products. So they are adding value a little bit, not to export everything. Okay. Now we have talked about those countries that farm seaweed. Okay. We have our other countries. As I said, they are harvesting the seaweed and using it to either to make products or to sell and so on. So there are 2 countries that already have seaweed processing plants. So in Tunisia, we have the Selke Marine Group. Selke Marine is actually farming and processing Gracilaria to produce the gel agar. And they are also farming and processing Eucheuma and Kappaphycus for producing carrageenan. And here I want to report that Selke Marine also has farms in Mozambique and Tanzania. I tried to get data for this, I didn't get, but I know that they have farms in Mozambique and they have farms in Tanzania. So they are also producing seaweed in these other African countries, bringing the seaweed to Tunisia and processing it to make agar and carrageenan. No, mostly to make carrageenan, because they are in Mozambique and Tanzania, it's Eucheuma and Kappaphycus. So they import and then make carrageenan. Okay. Now we have Morocco. Morocco is harvesting seaweed. So they are harvesting this seaweed called gelidium. Harvesting gelidium to make agar. And in Morocco, they have a processing industry in their capital city, that is Rabat. Okay, and it's not only gelidium, but they also use the sagasam. Here I'm talking about floating sagasam. As I said, most of our countries use seaweed that is cast at the beach. You know, they are big volume in some seasons. So they're using the floating sargassum in their processing industry there. But they also did trial farming of this red seaweed, Gracilaria, and in 2021 they are reporting 13,000 tons of Gracilaria gracilis that is produced in Morocco through farming. If we look at like West African countries, we have Ghana. Okay, in Ghana they are harvesting again the cast sargassum to generate income to the coastal people, to the communities around. Okay, but apart from harvesting or collecting the sargassum, they have identified 6 potential red seaweeds. You remember sargassum is brown seaweed, so they have identified 6 potential red seaweeds that can be used in Ghana, in their country. And in 2017, they reported that there was cultivation. 2 villages were doing cultivation of the carrageenan-producing seaweeds, Kappaphycus and the Eucheuma. Okay, that is Ghana. And Nigeria. In Nigeria, they also use the cast sargassum, and from the sargassum they extract the alginate and they use it in different uses in their country. So apart from using sargassum, the floating or cast sargassum to make this alginate, they also did trial cultivation of Ulva. So it means that there is also some knowledge of cultivation in Nigeria. And they have also identified Hypnea as a potential species that they can farm in Nigeria. So it has been identified as a potential species because it has uses in the country. There's Senegal. In Senegal, they have identified that there are potential species that they can use. And this is the red seaweeds, this is the seaweeds, Hypnea and the Meristotheca. These are 2 species that they have identified as potentials in the country, in Senegal. And there were reports of, in 2020, there were reports of starting a processing plant that was by JICA's, Japanese International Corporation. So they were talking about starting a processing plant in Senegal for these 2 species that they have identified. And they were collecting these seaweeds and exporting, you know, sustainable collection. So they report that they exported between 80 and 100 tons of seaweed to Japan. That was in the year 2020. And they have plans to farm seaweed, most probably starting with these 2, and then with the others as well. And just to mention that researchers from Senegal visited Tanzania, you know, this guy called Ndiaye, while he visited Tanzania to discuss about potentials and to see how Senegal can start producing seaweed. And we have 3 other countries that have looked at potentials, and they are trying to look for ways to cultivate seaweed or to use seaweed. One is Eritrea. Eritrea, they have visited Tanzania, actually it was last year, and discussed about potentials of how they can start farming seaweed and so on. And Somalia. In Somalia, we have there is a women cooperative that has also been in contact with Tanzania to look at ways of starting cultivation and use of seaweed in their country, in Somalia. Another country, or the last one you can say, which there's information about potentials of seaweed in that country is Djibouti. So there was a study in 2012 to look at potentials of farming seaweed in Djibouti.
Is it okay for you? Robert?
I think we all lost flower, Philippe.
Where? Lost it. Connection. Always frozen. Ah, no.
I also disappeared briefly earlier on, so I don't know what happened, but
Okay,
That's quite often with Tanzania. I mean,
let's try to contact her. If she's not back in 1 or 2 minutes, we may propose John to start his talk, and then we'll offer the possibility to forward to conclude our talk after.
Hi, Stuart, John.
Yeah. Yeah, well, my proposal is maybe to move on with and offer the floor to John in order to save time, and we will have the possibility for Robert to really join after before we'll edit. So, did you agree, John, to start right now, and then for 30 minutes, and then after the 30 minutes, we will propose to Robert to continue.
okay, yeah, that's good. I also disappeared for a couple of minutes, so if I do, I've no idea why, but okay, do you want me to share my screen?
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Perfect.
Okay, everybody. From what you're hearing, Flower is making a wonderfully comprehensive summary of what's been going on in Africa and her ideas of where things are going. It's not a problem. I knew what Flower was going to say. So mine's a little different in that I thought I'd throw out a few ideas. I'm a biologist, so there won't be a lot of value chains and business plans. But I thought I'd try and put African production in a global context and just think of a few ideas of what next. And I thought it would sort of dovetail with what Flower has been talking about. So that's the background of what I'm going to say. I don't pretend to represent Africa, although I've been 40 years working with seaweeds at the extreme southern tip. It's a very big place, as we all know, with about 20% of the global landmass, and probably in a few years, 20% of the global population also. And if they were well studied, probably 20% of the world's seaweed species, I would guess. Not quite yet. But a lot of long coastlines, 38 coastal countries, and there are a dozen here with more than 1,000 kilometers of coastline. So there's lots of scope. And this list is biased against tropical West Africa in general, because there are lots of countries with smaller coastlines. But this surprised me when I downloaded it, nearly 5,000 kilometers of coastline on Madagascar, which is interesting. But of course, you don't just need coastline, you need the right sort of coastline. And one of our problems in Southern Africa is that South Africa, Namibia in particular, we have a very straight coastline. And I like to put a map of South Africa and Namibia superimposed with a map of Norway at the same scale. just to show you that Norway is many times smaller than South Africa, but has more than 3 times the coastline length because of all the fjords. So if you're going to grow seaweeds in the traditional way, in relatively sheltered coastal waters, you need the right sort of coastline, and that can be a problem. It certainly is in Southern Africa. We're talking about a seaweed revolution, but of course we're talking about a seaweed revolution in what I'm calling today the Western Hemisphere. I've just invented this Western Hemisphere. As you can see, I've drawn a line across the typical world map left of India. And you can see just about all the seaweed aquaculture so far happens east of this line in East Asia, particularly in 7 East Asian countries. And not much has happened elsewhere, but to the left of that line, of course, we have Zanzibar, which we've just heard about, and we have Chile. So it seems to me that although the seaweed revolution, the first phase of the seaweed revolution started maybe, I don't know, 70 years ago in Asia with rapid growth in seaweed aquaculture, some countries, particularly in the west of my line, Zanzibar and Chile, started a long time ago also, and are also in some ways entering the second phase of the seaweed revolution. And I think as with Asia, the next phase of the seaweed revolution, as with the first phase, will have difficulties as well as opportunities. And so it's something we need to think about with our seaweed revolution thoughts, I think. Most of what's grown on a global scale, which of course means Asia, is in 4 main groups. I've given them very short names. They tend to be names FAO uses. I apologize to the taxonomists. But the biggest producers, these 4 groups make up about 90% of world seaweed aquaculture production, the vast majority of it. First of all, we have kelps with 37%, Eucheuma with about 1/3, Eucheuma and its relatives, including Kappaphycus. So these 2 together make up about 70% of world seaweed aquaculture production. And then we have the Gracilarias and their relatives, agar producers, which is about 14%. And then in the bottom left, we've got porphyra, most of it now pyropia, with about 6%, but worth more per kilo because most of it's consumed by human beings, by people. So we've got biggest producer, the sugar kelp, with some wakame among the kelps used for food, feed, and alginate. Eucheuma Kappaphycus for carrageenan, Gracilarias for agar, and porphyra or nori for human food. But one big important thing I want to make from this slide is the difference between tropical and temperate. The 2 on the left are temperate products. They're in temperate seas, kelps and porphyra, places like China, Korea, Japan. Eucheuma and Kappaphycus are tropical things in many parts of the Indo-Pacific, large amounts, particularly in Asia, but also Tanzania, as we've seen. And whereas Gracilaria, there are both temperate and tropical species, and places like, for example, Chile, have been growing temperate Gracilaria for many years. But there are also, as we've just seen from flower, examples of tropical Gracilarias being grown nowadays. So I wanted to follow up on this tropical temperate idea and mention that in Africa, we don't have any cold temperate regions. As far as I know, there's nowhere in Africa where monthly mean seawater temperatures are less than 10 degrees. They get fairly close in Namibia and South Africa, but there are no cold temperate regions in Africa. There are 2 tropical regions which are very different from one another. In the East Africa is the west part of the Western Indian Ocean, which is a very species-rich region linked to the Indo-West Pacific, where there are lots of seaweed genera in common and lots of species which vary across the region, with the biggest species diversity in the Coral Triangle in East Asia. But after that comes the Western Indian Ocean. So a very large species-rich tropical region. Whereas on the other side, we have a very small tropical region, relatively speaking, particularly because of the way the currents go in the northern and southern hemispheres, upwelling. And also historically, in tens of thousands of years ago in the ice ages, this tropical region was much smaller still. And there's also a lot of big rivers that flow into this region. So it's a very different tropical region to tropical East Africa. And then we have the warm temperate regions and the Mediterranean, and then to the left of that, Northwest Africa, which is a long gradient from warm temperature to tropical, with the biggest change being near the point of West Africa from North and South Senegal. So that's a large warm temperate region. In Southern Africa, we actually have two warm temperate regions. Southeastern Southern Africa, southeastern part, south and east coast of South Africa is a warm temperate region, gradually moving into the tropics where South Africa meets Mozambique. On the other side, where the circle is, we have a very different region. We have what we call a cool temperate region with an enormous upwelling of cool water on the west coast of South Africa and Namibia, full of nutrients, cool water, annual means of 13 or 14 degrees on much of the west coast. So very different. So when we think about growing seaweeds in Africa, we need to bear these different regions in mind and the sort of things that will grow in these different environments. I think it's worth mentioning. Flower was talking about this. I put it up for a slightly different reason. Most of what's grown in Africa is Eucheuma Kappaphycus in that big tropical region in East Africa and the Western Indian Ocean. 97% of African seaweed aquaculture production. Apart from that, South Africa grows about, now it's gone up in the last couple of years, it's something like 2,500 tons fresh of Ulva and integrated systems with abalone. And there are bits of Gracilaria in many other places and various species probably. I'll talk about that in a moment. But that's what Flower was pointing out, I think. So it's a very skewed pattern at the moment of what's happening. So if we think about kelps in South Africa, there are kelps in Africa in general. There are two regions of South Africa with kelp forests. First of all, there's no sugar kelp. We have no Saccharina. Saccharina is a Northern Hemisphere genus. So we have the Japanese sugar kelp, which is most of the aquaculture production in Asia, and lots of work going on in the North Atlantic, for example, with the European sugar kelp, but we don't have Saccharina in Africa. We don't also have wakame. Undaria has been introduced from Asia at many places, temperate places around the world, for example, New Zealand, Argentina, Europe before that. And there are records in the Canary Islands, which is very close to the mainland of Africa, but I couldn't find any records in mainland Africa. And of course, Undaria, wakame is being grown in Europe in a couple of places where it was introduced many years ago now, but we don't have it yet that I know of on the mainland of Africa. But we do have kelps. We have 4 kelp species in South Africa, Namibia, Aclonia maxima, Laminaria pallida, Aclonia radiata, Macrocystis pyrifera. And you can see a picture of a kelp forest near Cape Town of Aclonia maxima, mostly in the bottom. And there are at least 2 kelp species in North Africa. I put, some of the taxonomists will notice I put the word kelp in inverted commas, Laminaria ochroluca and Saccharisa, which isn't a Laminaria ales, but we can call kelp for this purpose. There are also kelps in northwestern Africa. There's not a lot of literature on this. Flower also mentioned some of them, but you can find, there's a paper about possible commercial harvesting by Rezum et al. This picture's from Spain, not from Africa. This is Laminaria ochroluca. And I also found a paper about alginates from Laminaria and Saccharisa from Morocco. So the remain, of course, you don't need an awful lot of kelp to grow it, provided the environment is conducive, provided you've got fertile material. So a possibility. Whereas in Southern Africa, in South Africa, we have 4 kelp species. The bottom right one, D, is Aclonia radiata, which is a smaller kelp, also very widespread in Australasia. It's maybe 1 or 2 meters long. It grows on the South African south coast. Whereas the other 3 grow on the west coast. Most of the biomass is Aclonia maxima, maximum length 17 meters that we've measured, a very big kelp. Then B is Laminaria pallida. C is Macrocystis pyrifera, which in other parts of the world people call giant kelp, whereas in South Africa it's very rare. and it's not very giant, maybe 6 or 7 meters maximum. There are only a few small populations in the south. There's been a kelp industry for more than 50 years, 70 years in South Africa, based on harvesting from natural populations and collecting wash-up kelp. And so far, it's mostly been used for feed for abalone aquaculture, for biostimulant production, and as dried kelp for alginate. And at the moment, it's something like 11,000 tons fresh and 2,000 tons dry per year. But in the past, it's nowhere in Africa has anybody commercially cultivated kelp as yet. But things are changing. This is kelp blue. And I was saying before the meeting started to Philippe Potin, we had Philippe and his colleagues in Roscoff organized a marine biology postgraduate course in Namibia in January 2020. And just at the end of 2019, I had an email from the CEO of Kelp Blue, Daniel Hooft, telling us about this international group's ideas of growing very large farms of kelp around the world. And they'd picked the west coast of Southern Africa as one of the best places because of the upwelling of nutrient-rich water from the Benguela current. So Daniel was invited to the workshop. It unfortunately coincided a couple of weeks later with the COVID lockdown, but they managed to start. They met lots of Namibian fisheries people, and now Kelp Blue is growing Macrocystis in Luderitz Bay. This is their initial idea. This is to have 70,000 hectares or something like it in the next 10 years. They started off in 2022 on the right-hand red cross in Shearwater Bay near the coast. And now they're moving on to a commercial phase, and they're already building offshore structures for growing Macrocystis. And they've already started producing a biostimulant. And the picture at the top was taken in January of this year of a Macrocystis farm in. So things are happening with kelp in Southern Africa. Very much smaller. We have a little project in South Africa that started later, and we did a pre-feasibility study in 2022 with the idea of trying to grow 3 species, Macrocystis, Aclonia maxima, Laminaria pallida, in Saldanha Bay on the west coast of South Africa. It's funded by UK aid through the Bivalve Shellfish Farmers Association of South Africa. It's continuing in 2023. We have some kelps in the water. So on a much smaller scale, things are also starting in South Africa. Okay, when it comes to Eucheuma gracilaria, it's interesting that in West Africa that I know of, certainly not in this John et al. Paper, there's no mention of records of Eucheuma or Kappaphycus growing naturally in West Africa. But there are lots of species of gracilaria, and there are flower mentioned growing Gracilaria gracilis in Morocco, I think, or Tunisia maybe. This is the picture on the bottom right is Gracilaria gracilis experimental culture in the 1990s in South Africa, in the same bay, Saldanha Bay. And the one above it is a commercial Gracilaria gracilis culture in Namibia, also in Luderitz Bay, that ran for a couple of years around the year 2000. So again, growing Gracilaria has been done in Africa before, but it's starting up again. And according to John et al., Gracilaria gracilis is recorded right from Western Sahara in the north, down the west coast, as far as Namibia. Taxonomy, whether this is all Gracilaria gracilis, I doubt. So it definitely needs some molecular barcoding. To me, Gracilaria gracilis is a temperate species. And I wouldn't mind guessing that some of the tropical ones are Gracilariopsis, but certainly in South Africa, our Gracilariopsis has similar agar contents and grows at similar rates on ropes. So it might not matter. I just wanted to mention that more than 20 years ago, flower also grew Ulva and Gracilaria in tanks in fish ponds in Tanzania. So these ideas have been about for a long time. I have a quote here from Vincent's wonderful book, The Seaweed Revolution. I wanted to put it in because Vincent was talking about domesticating Kappaphycus many years ago by Maxwell Doty. And he said, after 8 years of relentless research, the researcher from Hawaii, that's Maxwell Doty, and his colleagues finally managed to domesticate Kappaphycus. And this is just some of our experience in South Africa. This is from Rob Anderson's group in the early 90s, growing Gracilaria on ropes in South Africa for a 4-year period. They had a couple of crashes where there were low nutrient levels in the bay, but basically it grew at 8% per day right from the beginning. And I think it makes a difference choosing a Gracilaria that grows naturally, generally unattached in sheltered bays or loosely attached in the sand, what I call stringy gracilarioids. Gracilariopsis also has them. Very finely branched, grow very fast, and they grow naturally unattached. And certainly the Southern African experience is that these things, you can take them out of the bay and tie them on a rope, as here, and they grow. And the same thing happened in Namibia, in Ludritz Bay. So think about that if you're looking for a Gracilaria. That's just some advice. Rather than a species attached on a reef, look for one in sheltered waters that's used to growing in fairly sheltered conditions. In South Africa, it's been mentioned a couple of times that we grow now 2,500 tons of ulva on abalone farms, and I'll show you an example in a moment. A couple of farms also grow Gracilaria. It's harder to grow, our experiences, than ulva in these sort of tank systems. You can see the Gracilaria is aerated, whereas the ulva isn't. Tends to get fouled easier, but it grows, and the abalone love it. Again, you need to find a species or a strain that can grow vegetatively, can keep growing without producing spores all the time, particularly with ulva. And generally, this has happened around the world accidentally. People have tried different ulvas, and some of them work. Even in the United States, that's how it started in the 1980s. So it's something worth thinking about. All ulvas are not the same, is a very important fact. So just to show you a abalone farm, the most advanced abalone integrated aquaculture system with abalone and ulva. The abalone are in the small tanks, which are about 5 meters long. The ulva's in the paddle raceways, which are about 30 meters long. This farm, which is Viking Aquaculture's farm at Buffeljas, has been going for 10 years or so. Abalone produce ammonia, and the toxic ammonia fraction, free ammonia nitrogen, is toxic to the abalone, so it builds up. But if you run the ulva through the ulva raceways, you can this farm has found you can recirculate 50% of the water that's pumped from the sea, which saves 40% of water pumping costs on this farm. So not only, and then you can feed the ulva back to the abalone. So not only are you recycling nitrogen, which was waste from the abalone, but you're also recycling water, which saves on pumping costs. So it's a very good example of two species integrated aquaculture. Okay, and finally, of these major groups, we have porphyra or pyropia. In South Africa, we've got molecularly something like 13 species, including 3 pyropias, although one of them's now been changed to a neopyropia, I believe. So we have scope for growing porphyrus. Morocco also has records. Morocco and neighboring countries, Senegal, have records of porphyrus, European species names normally, which could prove possible. But to my knowledge, nobody's really tried commercial nor recultivation in Africa, but it could happen in temperate regions. Okay, just the last couple of slides. I'm not sure how my time is going, Philippe. I'm just going to whip through a couple of possibilities. Flower mentioned sargassum. This is the sargassum bloom across the Atlantic from the Caribbean to West Africa. Huge amount, thousands of kilometers of floating sargassum. Flower mentioned the possibility of aquaculture. It floats. It could well be grown in aquaculture. I don't know. I wonder in Africa whether anybody would get an aquaculture permit. Certainly from the picture underneath, the Ghanaians are not too happy, the fishermen, about these huge amounts of sargassum washing up. Obviously, you can use this sargassum, but it's not a regular wash up. It depends on seasons and currents and winds. So that's something that needs to be thought about. Elsewhere, if you want to think of growing a different sargassum, in the Western Indian Ocean, I mentioned a couple of times to people that in looking at sargassums in the Western Indian Ocean, there's one species that's very widespread in the Indo-Pacific, which has a base which spreads and regenerates new shoots. This is Sargassum polycystum. And as you can see in the bottom left, Chinese scientists have already thought of growing this and already looking at its temperature and environmental tolerances. So if I was going to grow Sargassum in the Western Indian Ocean, I might try Sargassum polycystum and try and see if you can get the base to regenerate. Okay, somebody already asked in the chat, thanks for the question, about Asparagopsis. We don't have to look for replacements in Africa because Asparagopsis grows all around Africa. There's a temperate species and a number of genetic strains of the tropical species, Asparagopsis taxiformis. Armata, the temperate species, grows in Europe. It's certainly introduced in some cases, but it's recorded as far south as northern Senegal. It was also introduced in South Africa, we think, but it's been in South Africa since at least 1935. Asparagopsis taxiformis, the tropical version, has been recorded in all around both tropical regions, the west and the east. And certainly it's in Tanzania, I've seen it in Mauritius and Mozambique. We have 3 different genetic strains of it in South Africa. If you were going to grow something for methane production, why not try Asparagopsis? The question is, if this comes off, the Australians are putting lots of funding, as we saw, and effort into growing Asparagopsis. If it becomes a big world industry, maybe it would be cheaper to grow in Africa than in Australia or Europe. Would be an interesting thought. Flower mentioned Hypnea. There are lots of species of Hypnea on both sides. I put this in specifically about the Ile Pass, the scattered islands, a few little tiny islands between Madagascar and the mainland of Africa had 14 species of Hypneas. So there's no shortage of Hypnea diversity. But as you can see from the list, the taxonomy needs a lot of work. And 9 of them have no suggested species names in this paper, full of some very good seaweed taxonomists. So we definitely need some seaweed taxonomy in the Western Indian Ocean. Finally, Caulerpa lentilifera, sea grapes, is widely eaten in Japan and the Philippines. I believe I heard at a webinar somewhere. It's also grown in Vietnam for export. It's widespread, records in the tropical Western Indian Ocean. Not in tropical West Africa, different Caulerpas grow in tropical West Africa. Caulerpas generate from a stole on holdfast. It's been grown elsewhere. The bottom left is my lunch at Harbour restaurant in Okinawa. It was very delicious. So that's another possibility for the future. So I want to finish off with just a couple of thoughts. The seaweed aquaculture revolution, as we know, is already more than 70 years old in East Asia. If we think about the Western Hemisphere, maybe we're just starting, but in a sense, it started a long time ago in Tanzania and indeed in Chile. And we've been growing over in South Africa for more than 20 years in integrated systems. It's not so new, parts of it, but we're moving into the next phase, I think, in these countries. Many of you will have seen the World Bank report from a few months ago. One of the big take-home messages was that the next big things in the world seaweed industry are biostimulants and animal feed. So here's a South African perspective, a specifically South African perspective. South Africa's produced a biostimulant since the 1970s from Maclonia maxima, and currently there are at least 5 different ones produced in Southern Africa. It's nothing new in Southern Africa. The one that started it, kelp, is currently exported to 86 countries. Lots of research was done in the past at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg, and I asked Wendy Sturck, who works for Professor van Staden, who runs this unit, how much research was done on kelp in Pietermaritzburg, and she said there were 3 master's theses, 2 PhD theses, and 77 publications on kelp and its effect on crops and its physiology and its active ingredients. So if you're starting, obviously with biostimulants, you need to check your own product and test it against things, but don't reinvent the wheel. Please look at the literature that exists from Southern Africa if you're making a biostimulant. As far as animal feed is concerned, kelp's been used on a large scale since the abalone industry started as feed in South Africa since the early 90s. And there are a couple of companies putting seaweed in aquafeed in South Africa and have been for a number of years. So again, it's not new, but it's the next big thing also, we hope. And also, I noticed Thierry's with us, whose group invented the term IMTA. And as Thierry knows, I've said many times to him, IMTA is not a new thing in South Africa. We've been growing abalone and Ulva together for 20 years. So I think you can see, the point I want to make is that seaweed aquaculture is absolutely not new in Africa. We've had a good start, in some ways better than Europe. I say that a lot, it's my bias, but I could make a case for it. It's happening. But I think, to use an English idiom that fits very well for this webinar, I think the elephant in the room is my red words at the bottom. I put seaweed revolution feeding Africans, question mark, question mark. Here's my thoughts. Any animal, including people, that has a small amount of seaweeds in their diet will be healthier than without, from the evidence that I've seen. And the question to all of us is, how do we bring that about? And it might be the third or the fourth phase of the seaweed revolution, but I think it's something we all have to aim towards. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John, for this very stimulating talk, and to keep also the time. So, as I was mentioning before, you started, Flower is back with us. So sorry for the technical problems, Flower, and I will offer you the possibility to conclude your talk, so to talk for about 8 to 10 minutes, to be able to show us your final slides. So could you start again your presentation when you stop it?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can hear me? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, so sorry, I have to put. Okay, yes, sorry, it was power cut, you know, that's the life we have here. So I was talking about challenges that are faced by mostly those countries that are farming the eucheumatoids, the carrageenan-producing Eucheuma and the Kappaphycus. That we have the challenge of climate change that is causing diseases and pests, and low prices of seaweed that the farmers think that it is not comparable to the work that they do, and we have limited market of both the dry seaweed and the seaweed products. Most of the seaweed products, especially in Tanzania, are sold to tourists, in exhibitions, so the market is still very limited. And there's also a challenge of seed availability. It is especially when it is like hot season, and then you need good seed that doesn't have diseases or epiphytes. Sometimes it is a challenge. And also I mentioned about storms and cyclones, especially in Madagascar and Mauritius. It's also a challenge that is facing this seaweed countries that are farming the seaweeds. Now, these challenges result in a declining seaweed production. In some cases, there is a really decrease in seaweed production. I mentioned that cotton is a higher value seaweed, but this seaweed is also very sensitive to the environment. So, like high temperatures or rapid changes in salinity can cause this. So, in most areas, it is difficult to farm the higher value seaweed, the Kappaphycus, or also known as cotton. And also, in some seasons, it is difficult to farm seaweed, like in the hot season. So the year-round farming cycles is getting less and less, coming into maybe cold season and rainy seasons and so on. And there are a lot of interventions that many of these countries have done. They are producing farming technologies that help to farm the seaweed, and also they're supporting farmers a lot to go to farm, to use the innovative farming methods, for example, provide farmers with or helping farmers to obtain fiber boats to go to deep water areas and so on. And also we are slowly starting like Tanzania to have a processing plant that is based in Zanzibar. So there are some interventions that are aimed at addressing the challenges that are being faced by the farming. Okay, so that's what I was saying. So if we have heard of those countries that grow the Eucheuma and Kappaphycus, we have countries that are harvesting other seaweeds and so on. So what should we really grow in Africa if we want to revolutionize our seed? This was supposed to come before John's, but when the power cut is a challenge, but was supposed to come before, and then John will fill the rest. So I am saying that in Africa we need to continue farming Kappaphycus and Eucheuma, the carrageenan-producing seaweeds. And why? Because Africa has not really developed the carrageenan process. You know, we have heard of a country in Tunisia. I mean, a processing industry in Tunisia, and the one starting in Tanzania. So we have to really tap into the processing of the seaweed to produce carrageenan. So we can continue to farm this seaweed in those areas that it can be farmed where the seaweed grow naturally in the waters. But if we wanted to grow, then we say we continue to grow this because we need to valorize our seaweed. What about then under what conditions? We said there's a challenge with the climate change, for example. So we need to do climate smart farming. So it means where there are challenges of climate change, then we do climate smart farming, we develop technologies that are required, we look at the seasons, where to maximize farming and so on. And also we have deep water areas. Deep water areas, you know, we're talking about not beyond 20 meters, but we have a huge area there, which can be used to produce seaweed. It is a vast area there. So if we utilize this area, of course, we need marine spatial planning to see where to farm, where to pass, where to fish, and so on. But we have an area where farmers can go out and increase seaweed production. And in valorization, in processing the seaweed to make, let's say, the seaweed products or carrageenan, you know, we have 54 countries in Africa. It's many countries. So if you want to only utilize the African market as buyers of this seaweed product, it is already a huge market. So we need to process our seaweed, not to sell raw materials all the time. So for this, we can continue with the Eucheuma and the Kappaphycus. And then apart from farming those two genera, we need to domesticate other species. Those species that have potential. We have talked of Gracilaria, Ulva, Kaulepa. John has now talked about them a lot. Gracilaria to produce the agar. Agar is a product that is needed in many of these schools, hospitals, you know, to grow the microbes. Most of our countries are importing agar from abroad, while we can actually domesticate our own Gracilaria. And also Ulva is used as food for people, especially, but it can also be used in animal feed, which the potentials have already been shown in other countries. And we have Kaulepa. Now Johnny has talked about it. So Kaulepa, you know, like if you go to the markets in Philippines, you find Kaulepa. So if we have our own Kaulepa, like this picture here is the Kaulepa in Tanzania. So why not domesticate Kaulepa and use it for food in our country? And Hypnea, you have heard about from John a lot. And other species that have potential. And John has talked a lot of other species, especially the temperate ones. So if we wanted to domesticate these other species, we need to establish the market first. We don't want to produce seaweed and then we don't know how to use it. We start with the market and then we domesticate these other species that we can use in Africa. So before I finish, I just want to acknowledge Global Seaweed Coalition for organizing this webinar. And most of the work that, most of my talk was based on a publication under Global Seaweed Star. So I'm acknowledging my co-authors there, Elizabeth Kotia-Cook, John Bolton, Fred Pascoe, Betty Nyonje, and Kushal Narayan. And also there are people who provided updated information that I've used in this presentation, like Alex Kimas, Sidonio Chamo, Valera Diaz, Fred Pascoe, Wali Ndiaye, Kafaya Tipakoya, and so on. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Power, and it was nice for you to be able to conclude your talk and to in fact raise the final question: what species we should grow in Africa for the future. So that will, of course, open the floor for discussions. I don't know. I didn't really see too much questions in the Q&A, but I've seen some in the chat. And we'll be able to, in fact, answer. So I see one hand raised by Adrien Vincent. So maybe I will offer the floor to Adrien for the first question.
Thank you so much, Philippe, and thank you so much, Flower and John, for this fascinating discussion and presentation. So I'm working with the Global Seaweed Coalition, and actually, we have started a number of discussions with international funders to get some development and funding money to come into the African seaweed revolution that you talked about. And so I have basically two questions for you. The first question is where, because you have identified all those countries where there is a bit of seaweed, already a lot, or not yet, but there is a potential. But where should we focus our kind of first priorities in terms of getting the funding, acknowledging that we cannot maybe yet build a full Pan-African project? And the second question is what for? And I would love to hear from you, what should be in your mind the priorities for funding? Should that be about economic feasibility and identification of new potential market applications? Should that be around domestications of new species and slightly more scientific and R&D? Should that be more about awareness raising and engagement with local markets, to your point, John, about getting African citizens to eat a bit more seaweed in their diet? Should that be around policy engagement and unlocking some regulatory barriers? We'd love your guidance so we can then pitch on your behalf to all those international funders and bring the money back to Africa to develop this revolution. Thank you.
You want to start, Flower?
You go on,
Okay,
John? Yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so I
Go
will
ahead,
start
Flower.
with the first question. I would say, in the seaweed industry, there are a lot of gaps. We are talking about gaps on, valorization, adding value. So when we talk of adding value, we see that it's not known much about adding value, about using seaweed to make seaweed products. Use of seaweed products is not something that everyone knows. So we can say awareness on using seaweed and seaweed products, I think, is something that is really needed if we want to do this revolution, and we want to do revolution through producing and using our own seaweed. But it's some kind of combined issues, because when we talk of adding value, so producing, we are still talking about domestication of the species that we need, and we are saying that if there isn't a policy that is supporting seaweed production or supporting seaweed as an industry, it is already a gap there. So I think it is a combination of a lot of things, but I would say mostly we should look into value addition and domestication of seaweed species.
Okay, if I'm going to answer the question, Adrian, it's interesting. We had a workshop last Monday about our kelp project, and it was a workshop, and it had, I don't know, about 40 people there, but they ranged from the local community right through to the FAO and the UNDP and everything in between. And I think as Flower said, you can't do one without the other, but you have to start somewhere. And to me, if you're going to go kelps for it, just as an example, in South Africa, you need the point we came to. There was somebody talking about the value chain, but first you need a proof of concept. You need to be able to grow something in the first place. That's my thought. So without that, you don't have anything. And once you can grow something, then you can start making business plans and seeing what, obviously there have to be markets, but generally, if the market for Eucheuma exists, and unless you can show that your species grows in the place you want to grow it, you're not getting anywhere with anything. And that's what worries me, is that a lot of the production side of things goes on for a long time when it doesn't, it takes a long time. If you're going to take an indigenous species, I've been working with sea urchins for 10 years. It takes a long time to make a new species work. And so there has to be a continual, even if it's small scale, input into production while all these other things are going on. Maybe I'm biased, but that's my view.
Thank you, John. Yeah, Thierry, your advice, your hand first, and then Nicolas.
Yes, I was very interested in the map west east on this line. I think we should superimpose on that map why it is growing in certain country and also a lot in tropical region. And another elephant in the room, it's being grown where it's cheap. And as a matter of fact, for example, on the west, Canada there is no color for Canada. Canada is not on the map. And I am not talking only about our IMTA effort in the last few decades, but look at the work, tremendous work on cultivation done in Halifax by NRC since the 60s. And the problem is the West has not been able to convert. A lot of work has been done in the West, but conversion to large-scale cultivation is not happening. And I think it's because seaweeds globally are undervalued. And I would say the seaweed industry, and I am talking about buyers, processor, upper, it's their own interest that seaweed keep to be cheap. So I would say there is a kind of conflict of interest there. We're wonderful, but we want to keep it cheap. No, it's about time we value seaweeds, and it's not only value added of the product, the biomass. It's, where I am coming. It's value added by recognizing ecosystem services. We have to put a value on these things. We have to increase the value of seaweeds because at the present time they are undervalued, and there is pressure by the industry to keep it undervalued. And it's a vicious circle. We have to get out of that, and we have to give the real value of seaweeds.
Thank you, Thierry. Some reaction, Flower or John?
I agree.
You agree? Okay. So
I agree completely.
okay, me too. Let's Nicolas ask our questions.
Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. Sorry about that. It may be more of an observation for this group. So first of all, thank you both, Flower and John, for wonderful presentations. It was really helpful. I learned a lot. And my comment is going to be more on the economic side, because that's part of the valorization process. And so any thoughts that you might have would be most welcome. And that is that as I was preparing this paper on seaweed and women, that Flower, thank you very much for your contribution to that. And I'll be making a presentation on Monday in Geneva, building on that. As I was doing it for Africa, I looked into the African Continental Free Trade database, or rather I tried to look for seaweed trade, non-existent. And so my point is one that the Global Seaweed Coalition has made on multiple occasions is how can we ensure that governments are actually collecting this data and that they're registering it in the places that is needed. So any thoughts that you might have on that as the leading seaweed experts on the continent would be most welcome. Thanks.
John and Flora?
John, I think
I think that's the problem. I'm not sure that, I'm just thinking who the people who exist who would be able to answer that question. It's an interesting one.
I think the African Union is a good place to start, and connecting with folks like Bernice McLean and making those connections is going to be really important, because otherwise an important piece of the puzzle is going to be missing. Thanks.
Can I just say, what really from the Seaweed Coalition and everything that's happening, putting seaweeds up front and all of being in the news is making a difference. We're having, I get so many messages now from various people and lots of conservation organizations, people looking for things for coastal people to do now that the fisheries are breaking down, and all these things. Suddenly seaweeds is out there. So these people like the African Union need to get involved, I think. And you're right, I think we need more seaweed politics on this side of things.
Absolutely. And I just saw Warren's comment in the chat, and as the probably the economist most up to date on this, FAO doesn't track seaweed trade. UNCTAD is doing it more and more. But on the continent itself, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement tracks intracontinental trade. And nowhere was that intercontinental trade showing up at all. So trade between, say, Tanzania and Tunisia, that wasn't showing up and should. Thanks.
And it's a big gap there, and I think it needs to be filled. So we need to really work, help each other everywhere to make sure that this is really put forward, because it's a gap that we agree if it exists, it's a big problem.
We have 2 or 3 minutes for the last question. So is there any questions from the audience? No. I would say just ask John and Flora to ask them what do you see for the near future in your respective countries. So do you think a bright future for seaweeds, or do you think we will face major problems due to all the challenges you mentioned in your talks? Just a few words about your vision for the future.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can I start? Okay.
Yeah.
In my case, I would say that, it is always to be smart, to take challenges and make them opportunities. It's always a smart move. So in Africa, well, Tanzania, Eastern Africa, and the whole of Africa, we know that we can expand seaweed farming, we can valorize the seaweed, we can produce more, and we can utilize more. So it is only to look at ways of doing it, smart ways, and then going forward. But I know that a lot of people now know that we need to produce more seaweed, we need to valorize, we need to have technological development. So I think that the industry is growing. So I think it is a bright future. Okay.
Yeah, if I answer that, again, I know Thierry wrote a paper about hype and aquaculture, and we have to be a little bit careful. But I think that getting seaweeds out there and getting it in the news has made a big difference. I mean, it really has, and we're continually being approached. And it seems to me that we need to catch that wave, and we need to, and there aren't too many of us. I think there's we need to get the message out and get people trained. And I think Kelp Blue is showing what you can do when you have some real funding. And I hope it succeeds. I really do, because if that sort of project comes off, then there will be all sorts of spin-offs, I believe, for things to happen with seaweeds. And certainly, you know, if Namibia starts growing many thousand tons of kelp, some South Africans are going to start thinking very quickly, I would think. And I'm hoping that things will start to roll. That's how I feel at the moment. It's I keep saying to everybody, how come the seaweed revolution started after I retired? But it feels like that sometimes.
Okay. Thank you very much, John and Flora. I think we will have the opportunity to continue the discussion through the project we will continue to support in the future in Africa with Global Seaweed Coalition and other organizations we are cooperating with, in fact, so we will have, I'm sure, many opportunities in the near future. So thanks so much to all of you for your talk, and also to the attendance for their engagement and the interesting questions which were raised during the different talks. So I will just end this webinar by a small promotional word, which is, of course, for those of you which are not already a member of the coalition, please join. It is still free to join the coalitions. It's easy, and you just have to connect to the website. Sophia has posted the address for where you will find all the information for that, so to become a member. So I will also make some advertisement for our next webinar. We will continue the cycle of webinars, and the next one will be on the 17th of May, and we will have the pleasure to host Dr. Elizabeth Cotier-Cook from SAMS in Scotland, talking us through the biosecurity topic around seaweed cultivations. So we hope that you have found this even both useful and enjoyable, and you will continue to follow the webinars organized by the Global Seaweed Coalition. So we look forward to seeing you, many of you, to our next events. So thank you very much for being with us, and goodbye, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.